This is Taiwan, just off the coast of China. The country's authorities have established a perimeter around the island. When a plane enters, it must identify itself to not be considered an enemy. But Chinese military planes do the opposite. They regularly enter this zone without authorization and without identifying themselves. In March 2023 alone, more than 100 incursions occurred. All these provocations are raising tensions between Taiwan, which values its independence, and China, which would like to bring the island under its control.
It's a small island up against a giant.
The Taiwan issue is one of the most explosive issues on the international stage today.
按绝不承诺放弃使用武力。
None of what China is doing suggests they're actually interested in peace.
So the question is, will there be a war between China and Taiwan? In order to answer this question, we have to understand the origins of the tensions. The first is historical.
En Chine, la retraite des nationalistes est générale. Les troupes du gouvernement de Nankin laissant la place aux armées communistes de Mao Tse-tung.
In 1949, after more than 20 years of civil war, the communists took power in China. The losing party, the nationalists, retreated to the island of Taiwan. 75 years later, Taiwan has become a de facto self-governing democratic state. But Xi Jinping's China still considers that the island belongs to the mainland and defends the principle of one China. In 2022, the Chinese government further confirmed its intentions in a white paper defining its policy towards Taiwan.
Resolving the Taiwan question is an unshakable historic mission of the Chinese Communist Party.
If Beijing is worried about Taiwan's desire for independence, it's because they are ideologically moving further away from each other. The second factor in the conflict is political.
C'est faire disparaître un contre-modèle extrêmement gênant pour le parti, une société de culture chinoise multiethnique qui a connu une dictature avant de se démocratiser et de connaître un succès économique. Ça, évidemment, ça colle mal avec les éléments de langage du Parti communiste qui expliquent qu'il n'y a pas d'alternative en Chine.
In 2016, the election of the independence-minded President Taiwan, who is less conciliatory towards China, increased tensions.
那就是中国必须正视中华民国台湾的存在的事实。
At this point, Beijing considerably increased its strategy of political, economic, and military pressure. The third factor is strategic. China's coastline faces the first island chain, countries allied to the United States. This prevents China from having direct access to the Pacific. A takeover of Taiwan would be a breach in this network of American alliances. This breach would also extend the range of nuclear submarines. Along the Chinese coast, merchant traffic is very dense and the waters shallow, which prevents Chinese submarines from operating discreetly. Taiwan is a direct access to the deep Pacific. So this explains the tensions. But invading a territory with 24 million inhabitants, the majority of whom are hostile to any attempt at unification, is no small thing. Is a Taiwan invasion feasible for China? It's undeniable that Beijing has an overwhelming military superiority over Taiwan. Its army has 12 times as many soldiers. It has 8 times as many tanks, 30 times as many infantry fighting vehicles, and many amphibious vehicles which can operate on both land and water. The Chinese also possess the largest number of warships in the world, more than the United States. According to this U.S. congressional report, China's Navy surpassed the U.S. Navy in the late 2010s. But that's not all. In the event of an attack,
They would mobilize their civilian ferries, their roll-on, roll-off ships, their maritime militia, so all the fishing vessels, all the ostensibly civilian transport vessels that would support their navy.
Regarding air superiority, the balance of power is a little less skewed. On the Taiwanese side, nearly half of its fleet is hidden in military tunnels in the country's east, near the cities of Hualien and Taitung. These steep mountains are not only used to protect military equipment, they can also make a potential landing difficult, which would only be possible on the west coast of the island, where the urban landscape is much denser. This sort of terrain usually favors the defending army, especially since Taiwan's infrastructure is very solid.
Taiwan gets hit by earthquakes a lot, and all the buildings are built to withstand those earthquakes. Taiwan also gets hit by some of the worst typhoons in the world on an annual basis. And so they're built to withstand that as well, which means that every building in Taiwan is basically a bunker.
And in the event of an invasion, there remains one final obstacle, the sea. Before landing, Chinese forces would have to cross a very large strait with a distance varying from 130 to 180 kilometers, in rough waters with shoals and strong currents. Once the strait is crossed, there is no guarantee that the landing will be successful, as this American analyst explains.
Amphibious landings are notoriously tricky to pull off, and the PLA in the past has exhibited deficiencies in critical areas such as strategic airlift, logistics, and anti-submarine warfare, among others.
Despite these difficulties, let's imagine that China does enter into open conflict with Taiwan. An invasion would entail consequences for Taiwan, China, and the rest of the world. A third actor is contributing to the escalating tensions, the United States. Since 1979, an agreement has defined U.S.-Taiwan relations. The U.S. has commercial relations with Taiwan and provides it with weapons. But officially, the United States recognizes Beijing and its One China principle. This theoretically prevents it from maintaining official diplomatic relations with Taiwan. However, in 2022, United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. In response, Chinese air incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone increased. The same thing happened in April 2023, when the president of Taiwan visited the United States, and Beijing reacted with a show of force around the island. Washington is also not supposed to have a military alliance with Taipei, but maintains strategic ambiguity, which means not giving a clear position on the possibility of American intervention in case of conflict. Except that,
to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion.
Yes.
Biden has made this statement on several occasions, but the White House has walked back his remarks each time in an effort to contain Beijing's anger. For the United States, supporting Taiwan in the event of a conflict also means maintaining credibility with its network of allies in the region.
Japan's deputy prime minister says that if China invades Taiwan, Japan needs to defend the island with the United States.
But it doesn't stop there. In the event of a conflict, U.S. intervention would undoubtedly lead to a regional upheaval. But who would support the Chinese? Officially, a mutual aid treaty signed by China and North Korea is supposed to take effect. For other countries close to China, like Russia, experts are more uncertain about their military support. But before reaching this point, the scenario most often put forward by experts is that of a blockade, to try to force Taiwan to surrender. This would lead to serious consequences. As an island, Taiwan is 100% dependent on sea and air trade. It imports 98% of its energy resources. But a blockade would also have consequences for the Chinese economy.
On avance souvent l'argument que le coût pour la Chine d'un blocus ou d'une intervention militaire serait prohibitif, et c'est vrai, le coût serait extrêmement important.
According to this report by the Rhodium Group, the loss of trade with the rest of the world would amount to $270 billion. On a global scale, that's $2 trillion. This would be due to the collapse of stock markets, disruptions in international maritime trade, the fall in investments, and the disruption of supply chains. There is also a particular issue with semiconductors, as Taiwan produces 92% of the most sophisticated models. These electronic components are indispensable for manufacturing smartphones, computers, and household appliances. Without them, many sectors would be threatened. A blockade, a localized conflict, or a large-scale escalation. No matter what scenario plays out in the tensions between Taiwan and China, the entire international community will be affected.
Un conflit n'est jamais inévitable, rien n'est écrit et il y a de nombreux leviers pour empêcher justement un conflit, et les Européens, comme d'autres, ont un rôle pour contribuer à maintenir le statu quo dans le détroit de Taïwan.
In 2023, there is still time to avoid the worst.